Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's public presentation. First, I'd just like to say thank you all for attending. And I'd like to just ask everyone to make sure that they're moving towards the center of each row so that any empty seats can be made available at the ends of the row if people continue to arrive throughout the presentation. So I'm Jonathan Raish. I'm the city planner for Kirkwood, and I'm joined up front tonight by fellow staff Amy Lowry and Patty Dodal. We also have the city's consultant team for our comprehensive development regulation review project called Kirkwood by Design. From Development Strategies, we have Justin Carney and Ann Stevenson, and from Compass Point Planning, we have Wendy Moeller. And last but not least, we have multiple members of our City Council and Planning and Zoning Commission and other staff in the room tonight. So thank you all for attending. Before I turn it over to the consultant team, I'd like to mention a few items. So the information presented tonight is based on approximately 6 months of analysis and discussion by the steering committee, who have dedicated a great deal of time to this project. The committee has taken into consideration the various long-range planning documents that the city has developed in the past 5 years with public input, the citizen input that has been received throughout this process to date, and the recommendations of staff and the consultant team. The committee consists of 3 planning and zoning commissioners and 3 council members. And this presentation tonight will give an overview of the steering committee's recommended revisions to the various development regulations, which represent approximately 300 pages of code. So we won't be able to cover everything in detail tonight, but there is a great deal of information on the project website at www.kirkwoodbydesign.com. So because of the vast amount of information we'll be covering, we also have specific formats to facilitate a productive event tonight. So the event will not be used to discuss or answer questions related to any specific development projects, as those projects have their own defined process. Tonight is dedicated to a broader discussion of the various development regulations for the city. The presentation is estimated to be about an hour long, and we'll take a brief break in the middle to collect the first round of written questions. This will give staff time to organize some of the questions early on to prepare for written Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. So you should have all had 1 yellow card for questions and 1 white card for comments that were on your seat when you arrived. After the material is presented, we will collect the remaining questions. So we'll collect cards in the middle for that first half of the material. If you have questions related to the first half, you can submit them in the middle. That'll give us time to organize them. And then we'll collect cards again, the remaining question cards at the end of the presentation. And we'll group those questions together in common categories in an effort to provide answers that will benefit the largest number of people. We'll do this for about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for moderated written question and answer. And all questions should be submitted via the yellow cards. If you need additional cards, Patty has additional cards at the front and we'll be happy to provide you with them. After the moderated and written question and answer session, staff and the consultant team will be available at the tables in the front of the room here to try to answer any individual questions that still remain. If you would like to make comments on any of the information presented, please make sure to utilize the white comment cards and put them into the tray at the front of the room. We will provide scanned copies of the cards to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council, so this is the best way to ensure that they hear your comments. There will be an updated draft code that will be placed on the project website early next week, and the revised draft will incorporate changes that the steering committee made at the final meetings and will incorporate any clerical errors and omissions that have been identified in recent proofreading of all the sections. We also plan to post the presentation slides from tonight with the recorded audio on the project website as soon as we can. After tonight, written comments may be submitted to me via email or by bringing them in person to City Hall, and I will distribute these to the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council as appropriate. I have business cards with me tonight with my contact information, and my contact information is listed on the project website as well as the city's website. It's anticipated that the official public hearing, which is required to be held in front of the City Council, will occur in February after receiving a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission in January. So without further ado, I will hand it off to our consultant team.
Great, Jonathan, thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight. We've definitely got some individual seats here in the middle of the rows if you want to have a seat. Let's see, as Jonathan said, we are going to be presenting for probably about an hour with a break in between. And so, yeah, please make sure you're as comfortable as you can be. Again, I guess Jonathan covered a lot of ground here, but I want to reiterate a little bit of this. My name's Justin Carney. This is Ann Stevenson and Wendy Moeller, and we make up the consultant team that has been working on this since about April or May, and it's been definitely an intensive labor of love. With a variety of stakeholder meetings, very intense steering committee meetings. We'll go through a little bit of that, but I do want to thank you all for coming tonight. We really welcome and appreciate your attendance, your interest in this project, and the feedback and the questions that you will provide us tonight and throughout the rest of the adoption process. Tonight we're going to have just a brief introduction. As I said, Jonathan covered a lot of it, so it'll be pretty brief as far as the intro goes. We've got this split up into two different sections. The first one we're calling Hot Topics, from our stakeholder interviews, from hearing public comments that would come through city staff, from the comments that would come through the City Council and Planning and Zoning Commissioners and into our steering committee. We know that there are some very important front of mind issues, and so rather than tackling this and presenting this in the way that we tackled it, we're going to just orient it around what we think is going to be most interesting to you. We'll follow that up with what we're calling other topics, perhaps less critical to perhaps a lot of your concerns, and in some cases just we didn't make any changes to the code, and so we'll explain that a little bit. We have Q&A, listed there really at number 4, but as Jonathan said, we will take time halfway through to make sure, especially right after the hot topics, if you've got any specific questions, be filling out your question card, and then do make sure that if you've got any comments that you want made part of the record, that you also fill that out and leave that with us tonight. So we are updating, Kirkwood by Design is a project where we are looking at updating the development regulations for the city of Kirkwood. We're talking about zoning and subdivision ordinances. We're talking about the sign code and architectural review, the architectural review guidelines and regulations. That is what we were charged to do, and a lot of times when cities are looking at updating their zoning codes, it is to bring them into alignment with a variety of planning efforts that have happened. And you can see there that there are 3 fundamental planning efforts that have happened in recent years. The Envision Kirkwood Comprehensive Plan, the Downtown Master Plan, and the Pedestrian and Bicycle Plan being the 3 primary policy documents that have been created. Those are the policy documents. Those are the the policy guides, the goals and objectives that kind of set out a future direction. Things like the zoning code, the subdivision code, the sign code, architectural review are the tools that the city has to implement those policies. And cities will undertake an update like this in order to reflect perhaps new priorities, new direction that those planning documents set out. When you update your development regulations like this, not only are you looking to align with these recent planning and policy documents, but you're also using this as an update to perhaps clean up the code a bit. And we'll have some examples of what we've done in that department. But zoning codes over time, if you don't do a comprehensive update like this, you do small incremental updates over time, and sometimes how those get implemented by different staff over time or to address particular issues can just make the code sometimes a little bit disjointed. You've got to go here, there, and somewhere else to get a complete picture of what the development regulations might be. And so we've started to clean that up and streamline that and use that as an opportunity to do that. And then we'll have some other updates that are frankly like the sign code, a reflection of updating the codes to reflect current updated laws and court cases, particularly on the sign code regulation side of things. The Supreme Court and the state Supreme Court hand down decisions that impact codes, and you need to make sure, and we have made sure, that those codes reflect the current kind of legal standing that have been handed down by the Supreme Court, and that's another reason why you do this update. So, as I said, we're aligning with recent plans, but really the charge has been, a pretty broad and comprehensive review of all of these, and that's been what we've been tackling. We've started this process, and I'll show you the schedule, the timeline here in just a minute, but we started this process with a 2-day intensive stakeholder interview process, and you can see the stakeholder groups that we met with. Some of these are formal boards and commissions and that the city has here that implement the tools that we're updating, like the Architectural Review Board, the Board of Adjustment, Planning and Zoning, Landmark Commission, business owners, the Chamber of Commerce, the Home Builders Association. Those groups came together and helped give us, the consultant team, as well as to fill in, a lot of what we heard from staff. What are the key issues? What's going on? What's working? What's not working? What is it that they would suggest that we take a look at? And so that's how we started this process, was with that input, as well as with the kind of the guidelines and the goals of the plans that we're doing this. Jonathan mentioned our steering committee. We had 6 members, 3 from your Planning and Zoning Commission and 3 from your City Council, and they have, I would say, been absolute troopers as far as this process goes. It is, we live this stuff all the time. Jonathan, Amy, and staff implement this stuff all the time. Yes, the Planning and Zoning Commissioners and City Council make decisions at monthly meetings and such, but the intensity with which we have, dived into these issues and talked about the pros and cons, talked about, the kind of perhaps any sort of unintended consequences, and just kind of working through scenarios has been a lot of 2 and sometimes 3-hour meetings twice a week for about 6 months. So it has not been, taken lightly, and I really commend the steering committee for being as dedicated as they were to getting to this point here. As Jonathan said, the work that we've done has really been within this, last 6 months from the steering committee and the monthly work sessions that we did. But we started this effort back in April and May with the kickoff, the stakeholder interviews. We had a public meeting, an open house, where we synthesized what did we hear from all of those stakeholder groups, what are some of the issues that we were hearing from staff on implementation, how can we talk about streamlining, and we did a brief survey to kind of give us some touch points from the people that participated in that survey of what direction are we talking about with some of these major issues, and we presented that at what we see here with the public meeting and code diagnosis, and putting together an actual document that kind of guided the issues that we were going to look at. As I said, about 6 months worth of intense work sessions, 2 to 3 hour meetings twice a week for a month, to get us to this point where we are now, which is the public meeting. And then we're at the phase now where we've got a complete document, and we've worked through that with the steering committee, and this is basically the recommendation that will go forward through your legislative and decision-making process. So as you can see up there, there's still a Planning and Zoning Commission presentation and commission vote, and a vote for a recommendation, and then there's a City Council deliberation, public hearing, and then their final decision on this. So this will feel like we have done a lot of work. This is the culmination of the steering committee's effort to date, but there is still more to the process. And I guess really I've already kind of touched on this slide, and so did Jonathan. We'll be focusing the rest of the presentation in 2 different sections. The hot topics are the site development standards. We'll be talking about we'll talk building setbacks and building height, and how much space on a lot a building can cover, and Ann will go through those. We'll talk about the architectural guidelines and ARB review. We've talked about and we have presented a streamlining of looking at different zone districts and what are the uses permitted in those districts and how we can streamline that and modernize that and use some best practices that we see to help the staff administer that going forward. And then kind of with that is accessory uses. That's when we'll take a pause. If you've got questions, write them down on the yellow cards. We'll come around and collect those and kind of triage what's in front of us and kind of treat the Q&A session as what I would call a frequently asked question, FAQ kind of session. And the questions that really seem to have a lot in particular directions, that's what we will spend our time kind of letting you all know what the answers are. If we don't get to your question, whether it's in the middle or at the end or what have you, that's what the individual time is for, and we'll have that at the end of the presentation. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Ann.